The goose was furious. It stood guard, wings flared, hissing at any human who dared come close. Its target wasn't a predator. It was a veterinarian just trying to help. The object of its fierce protection? Not a nest of eggs, not another goose, but a full-grown pony, sick and suffering, lying nearby. This is the documented story of Sven and Chester, and the mystery of a bond so strong it forced humans to rewrite their rules of treatment. Now, let's explore their world. If you're already enjoying this story, a quick like and share makes all the difference. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. Their world was a small, unassuming farm sanctuary in the rural countryside, a place where the pace was dictated by the rising sun and the changing seasons. It was a collection of green pastures, white fences, and the low, comforting hum of animals living without expectation. Here, Chester the pony lived his quiet life. He was an older Shetland, his coat a dappled gray, his muzzle soft and white with age. He had come to the sanctuary years ago, carrying the quiet weariness of a life of giving rides at country fairs. Now his days were simple, grazing in the lower pasture, dozing under the shade of an old oak, and occasionally accepting a carrot from a volunteer. And then there was Sven. Sven was a domestic goose, white and proud, with bright, intelligent blue eyes. Geese are flock animals, but Sven had, for reasons known only to him, detached from the others. He was a character, a self-appointed inspector of the farm's happenings, often seen waddling with purpose along the fence lines. Their connection wasn't born of a dramatic rescue or a shared trauma. It simply was. It grew in the way that moss covers a stone, slowly, quietly, until it becomes part of the landscape itself. Chester would graze, and Sven would forage nearby, unafraid of the pony's massive, gentle presence. Sven would often settle down for a nap, tucked just a few feet from where Chester stood, a small white beacon against the pony's gray legs. There was an unspoken agreement between them, a shared stillness. The farm staff saw it every day. They'd smile at the sight, the aging, gentle pony and his opinionated, feathered companion moving through the pasture as a single unit. It was a simple, peaceful coexistence, a quiet, mutual understanding that asked for nothing and expected nothing. It was, they assumed, just a simple farm friendship. They had no idea how deep that bond truly ran. They had no idea what Sven was capable of until the day the stillness broke. It happened on a cold, damp Tuesday. A volunteer walking the feed route noticed it first. The lower pasture was empty, save for two figures near the water trough. One was lying down. That wasn't unusual for Chester, but this was different. He was flat, his breathing shallow, his legs splayed. He was in distress. Chester, the stoic old pony, had collapsed. Panic set in. The sanctuary staff rushed to his side, and the call was made to the local veterinarian. As the first caregivers approached Chester, calling his name, something new happened. A white bolt of fury shot out from beside the pony. Sven, who had been standing a silent vigil, transformed. He lunged at the staff, wings spread wide, neck extended, hissing with a ferocity they had never seen. He was no longer the farm's quirky mascot. He was a guardian. He planted himself between the humans and the suffering pony, creating a perimeter of one. His blue eyes were sharp and clear. You will not touch him. This was the first time they realized. This wasn't just friendship. This was a bond of fierce, absolute loyalty. The veterinarian's truck crunched to a halt on the gravel path. Dr. Evans, a seasoned vet with decades of experience in farm calls, stepped out, medical bag in hand. She'd seen everything: colic, injuries, all manner of livestock illnesses. What she was not prepared for was the reception committee. "Watch yourself," the sanctuary owner warned. His friend is with him." Dr. Evans saw the scene. Chester, down on his side, breathing labored. And next to him, a single white goose, standing stiff as a soldier. As she approached, Sven's head dropped low, parallel to the ground. A low, guttural hiss began, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The doctor, focused on her patient, took one more step. Sven exploded. He didn't just flap or run. He launched himself, wings beating, beak open, aiming directly for her legs. Startled, she jumped back. Sven didn't retreat. He landed, stamped his feet, and hissed again, daring her to move. "Okay," the doctor said, brushing off her jeans. "That's new?" They tried again. A staff member tried to circle around from the other side. Sven, with surprising agility, darted back, cutting them off, his neck a rigid spear. He was creating a perfect 360-degree defensive zone around the pony. Chester, in his pain, let out a low groan. The sound seemed to spur Sven to new heights of agitation. He began pacing, a tight, frantic circle around his friend, his blue eyes scanning every human, assessing every threat. It was astonishing.
Wow.
This wasn't a simple, confused animal. This was a deliberate, strategic defense. The staff was at a loss. They had a singular goal: get medicine into Chester, save his life. And that life was being actively endangered by the one creature who seemed to care about it the most. They tried logic. They tried soft, cooing voices.
Nobody's gonna hurt you.
They tried bringing a bucket of feed to lure Sven away. He ignored it. His singular focus was the pony. He refused to eat. He refused to drink. He just stood watch. As the hours passed, a cold mist began to fall, but Sven didn't seek shelter. He just tucked himself closer to Chester's belly, his white feathers a stark contrast to the pony's damp gray coat. They were witnessing a loyalty that defied every category they understood. A prey animal, a goose, was not supposed to guard a large mammal. It was not supposed to attack humans. It was not supposed to forsake its own survival, food, water, shelter, for the sake of another. And yet, here he was. "We can't get a needle in him," so Dr. Evans said, her voice heavy with frustration. "We can't run fluids. We can't do anything as long as that goose is on patrol." Chester's breathing was getting worse. The time for gentle negotiation was over. They had to make a move. They decided to be more forceful. Two staff members brought a large, flat board, intending to gently herd Sven just a few feet away. The moment the board touched the grass, Sven went into a blind rage. He attacked the board, biting the wood, beating it with his wings, making sounds of pure reptilian fury. He was, they realized with a shock, completely fearless. He was also winning. He was faster, more unpredictable, and driven by a purpose they couldn't break. He was not guarding a friend. He was guarding his family. The situation had reached a critical impasse. Chester was visibly weakening, the damp cold seeping into his bones. Dr. Evans stood back, watching the scene with a researcher's eye. Sven was now pacing relentlessly, his breathing fast. He was under immense stress. But it was more than that. Every time Sven hissed and charged, Chester's own body would tense. A low, pained whinny would escape him. "I think the goose is stressing the pony," Dr. Evans said quietly to the sanctuary owner. "Chester knows his friend is fighting, and it's making his own condition worse. They're feeding off each other's anxiety." This was the proving ground. It wasn't just about saving Chester's life. It was about honoring the bond that was, perversely, threatening it. They weren't treating one sick pony. They were managing a complex interspecies relationship under extreme duress. A new plan was needed. Force was off the table. It was stressing both animals. Distraction had failed. Sven was too smart, too focused. What if, the sanctuary owner suggested, what if we don't try to separate them at all? It was a radical idea. Standard veterinary practice is to isolate a sick animal to treat it cleanly and safely. But standard practice had failed. What do you mean? Dr. Evans asked. I mean, we treat them together. We acknowledge the bond. We stop seeing Sven as a problem to be solved and start seeing him as part of the patient. This was the moment the entire dynamic shifted. They changed their body language. They stopped moving with urgent predatory focus. They knelt down. They spoke softly, not just to Chester, but to Sven. It's okay, Sven, a staff member said, holding out a handful of oats, this time not as a lure, but as an offering. We are here to help your friend. We are here to help Chester. Sven stopped hissing. He looked at the oats, then back at the human, then at Chester. He didn't take the food, but he didn't attack. He held his ground, but the frantic energy subsided, replaced by a wary, watchful stillness. Slowly, gently, Der Evans approached, not with a needle, but just with her hand open, low to the ground. She spoke to the goose. I know you're scared. I know you're protecting him. He's a good friend, but he needs my help, Sven. She edged closer to Chester, moving with a slow, deliberate calm. Sven watched her, his head tilted, his bright blue eyes processing this new approach. He was analyzing the threat, and for the first time, he seemed to be considering that there might not be one. Dr. Evans was now just a foot from Chester. Sven tensed, letting out a low, warning hiss, but he didn't charge. Easy, Sven. Easy, Chester, she murmured. She placed a hand on the pony's neck, gently stroking him. Sven watched her hand. He watched Chester's reaction. The pony, exhausted, seemed to lean into the touch. Sven took a small step back. It was barely an inch, but it was a seismic concession. It was a signal. I am watching. I do not approve, but I will wait. This was their opening. With one person assigned to speak to Sven, keeping him engaged, Dr. Evans was able to begin her examination. It was painfully slow. Every time she pulled out a new instrument, a stethoscope, a thermometer, the truce would almost break. Sven would tense, his feathers would ruffle, and the hissing would resume. But the Sven talker would quickly kneel, redirecting his attention. It's okay, Sven. Look, just a little. You're helping. Finally, it was time for the injection, the critical dose of anti-inflammatories and painkillers. This was the moment of truth. Dr. Evans prepped the needle. Sven saw the glint of metal, and his protective fury surged. He lunged, but this time the staff was ready. The sanctuary owner stepped calmly in his path, not with a board, but just with her body, holding up her hands. No, Sven, you must let us. Sven slammed into her boots, flapping and hissing. And in that 2-second window of distraction, Dr. Evans administered the shot. Chester's body relaxed almost instantly as the medicine began to work. Sven, his attack over, seemed to sense the change. He stopped fighting. He walked back to Chester's side, nudged the pony's muzzle with his beak, and then simply sat down. The battle was over. The vigil, however, was not. The injection was not a cure. It was a ceasefire. Chester's illness was severe, requiring days of continued round-the-clock care. The staff set up a temporary tarp for shelter and brought fresh, dry hay to keep the pony warm as he lay in the damp pasture. And through every subsequent needle, every temperature check, every cold, anxious hour, Sven remained. He was a statue of white feathers, a small, unmoving beacon of devotion. He had created a new perimeter, this one not of aggression, but of quiet companionship. The staff now navigated around him, not against him, when, They brought Chester his warm bran mash. They placed a small bowl of corn for Sven right next to it. He would eat, but only after Chester had taken a weak bite. He would drink, but his head would snap up at the slightest sound. He was resting, but he was never off duty. The farm staff, hardened to the daily realities of life and death, found themselves deeply moved. They were no longer just treating a sick pony. They were tending to a family. They began to speak in hushed tones, not just for the patient, but out of reverence for the bond they were witnessing. On the morning of the third day, the air was still and cold. Chester, who had been lying flat for nearly 72 hours, stirred. He stretched one leg, then another. He took a deep, rattling breath. Sven, who had been dozing with his head tucked, was instantly alert. He stood up, watching. With a groan that seemed to echo in the fog, Chester folded his legs beneath him. He pushed, he faltered, he pushed again. And then he was up. He stood, swaying, weak and fragile, but he was on his feet. Sven did not make a sound. He didn't flap his wings or honk. He simply walked over to the pony, stood beside his trembling front leg, and leaned his entire feathered body against him. He closed his eyes. The staff watched, silent, tears welling in their eyes. This was the image, the very definition of loyalty. It was not a relationship of convenience. It was not a cute farm oddity. This was a bond forged in the quiet moments, now tested in the fire of a crisis and proven to be absolute. A silent promise between two souls that they would face this world together. Chester's recovery was slow, but it was steady, and every step of the way, from his first unsteady walk to the lower pasture to his first bites of fresh grass, Sven was there. He was no longer a frantic sentinel, but a quiet shadow. The crisis had passed, and their bond, now fully seen and deeply respected by their human caretakers, simply resumed. But for the humans at the sanctuary, nothing was the same. They had been given a window into a world they thought they understood, only to find it was deeper, more complex, and more profound than they could have imagined. They had witnessed a moment where instinct of a prey animal, of a flock animal, was completely and totally overwritten by something else. What do we call that? Scientists and behaviorists can offer explanations. Territoriality, resource guarding, imprinting, a confusion of flock dynamics. But these words feel clinical. They feel small. They fail to capture the feeling of that moment. The sight of a goose, a creature of air and water, willing to battle creatures 100 times its size for the sake of its friend. They fail to explain the self-sacrifice, the refusal of food and water, the patient 3-day vigil. This was not behavior. This was devotion. The story of Sven and Chester became a quiet legend at the sanctuary. It became a teaching moment, a reminder that the bonds we form are not limited by the labels we assign. It challenged the very hierarchy we place on emotion. We often reserve words like loyalty, friendship, and love for ourselves, or perhaps for the animals we deem intelligent enough, like dogs or primates, a goose and a pony. Two simple creatures living a simple life. They showed us that loyalty is a language spoken by all hearts, regardless of their shape or their species. It is not an intellectual choice. It is a profound, cellular, unspoken truth. Their story asks us to look closer, to see the quiet alliances in the fields we pass, to recognize the depth of emotion in the creatures we share this planet with. It reminds us that the capacity for profound connection is not a human invention. It is the signature of life itself. In a world that often feels fractured, the true stories of these animal bonds are not distractions. They are guideposts. They are a pure, unfiltered signal, reminding us that connection is our most fundamental instinct, and that to protect another, to stand guard in their darkest hour, is perhaps the most noble act any living being can perform. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to light. We have a question for you. What was the single moment in this story that resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.